Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with all of you this morning. So pleased to be here with my panelists. I'm Jennifer Hobbs, and on behalf of Dwight McBride and Earl Lewis, I welcome everyone to this sixth installment of the Academic Leadership Institute annual webinar series. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded. Unfortunately, Dr. Lewis had an emergency this morning. He's okay, but he won't be able to join us for the webinar today. And Dr. McBride can only join us for a short period because of some prior obligations. So I'm going to fill in today as moderator and panelist with this wonderful panel that is here to speak with us this morning. And I just want to say again, thank you to Dwight and Earl and to all the staff, Dahlia and Elizabeth, that really bring together all of these ALI programs. Just fantastic work and great conversations. So again, my name is Jennifer Hobbs. I recently have served as Senior Vice President, University Secretary, and Chief of Staff to the President here at the New School in beautiful Greenwich Village in New York. And I recently started a new role. I'm now serving as the Senior Vice President for Strategic Partnerships and University Initiatives here at the New School. So lots of exciting things coming my way. And I'm pleased to be able to talk about my work with boards of trustees this morning. In addition, I'm a very proud alum of the 2023 ALI residential summer program. So I've really enjoyed my time during that summer in person at Swarthmore with my fellow Academic Leadership Institute cohort members, and welcome to any of those that are here this morning with us. Just thrilled to be able to have everyone here today and really looking forward to some discussion on this important topic. A little bit about the Academic Leadership Institute and its mission. The mission is to increase the representation of rising leaders prepared to take on today's challenges and opportunities, who have real commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those who are on a path to becoming future university leaders, presidents, and provosts. The primary initiative for the Academic Leadership Institute does include the summer residential program. And complementary to the program is this webinar series that we're having here today that engages a broader audience on special topics and that feature recognized and esteemed leaders and thinkers from across the academy. Today's webinar topic is titled Working with Boards of Trustees in Today's Environment. And I'm delighted to welcome a discussion panel featuring a dynamic group of leaders and thinkers in higher education. And again, I'll serve as the moderator today. I might answer a few questions, maybe I'll moderator hat, then panelist hat. So we'll see how it goes here this morning. So again, thank you to everyone for participating in the webinar. There will be an opportunity towards the end for you to submit your questions through the Q&A and share your questions, insights, and perspective. For now, let's get started with some introductions of our wonderful panel here. I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves and also state what positions they have held or hold when working with the Board of Trustees. And to begin, I'd love to start with President Ben Vinson. Ben, can you get us started with some introduction?
Certainly. Well, first of all, let me just say how delightful it is to be here with all of you this morning discussing a really important topic here for higher education. And so I am the 18th president of Howard University. I've been enrolled since the fall of the preceding academic year. And I have served on a number of boards. I have chaired the board of the National Humanities Center, which is located in the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. I have also been a member of the Cleveland Museum of natural history, where I also served in a number of committee roles, particularly the governance committee. I have served and am serving on the National Humanities Alliance, where I am currently secretary of that organization and a member of the executive committee. I have served as well on the board of the American Historical Association, where I also am currently the president of that organization. And so there are a few other boards, Business Volunteers United in Cleveland, that I've served on as well. But certainly understanding that this is an important moment in board life as we confront a number of challenges institutionally, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation today with my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Ben. Let me turn it over to David Rowe. David, could you provide us with a little bit of introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. And what an honor it is to be in all of your company today. And thanks for inviting me and including me in this conversation. The topic is, at this, at this time, and we have to kind of look at the minute and the hour to see what it's like working with boards. It's ever evolving really quickly. My history in higher education has really been connected with advisory boards and fiduciary and governing boards for most of my career. I've served as vice president for advancement, where I actually supported boards, support the president with the work of the board. Also, Lamar's going to tell you a little bit about student trusteeship. I was the recent graduate trustee of my alma mater, which was our equivalent of a student trustee at that time. And then I've served as president of two different institutions, Centenary College of Louisiana and Lancaster Theological Seminary, and served as interim president there, and had the privilege of working with board members. And just noticed in the participants list that one of my former trustees at Lancaster is online today. So hello, Rebecca. And I have worked with the Association of Governing Boards as the managing principal for consulting, and I work extensively with theological schools through Intrust Center for Theological Schools, and do governance and strategy work there. My current role is to serve as president and founder of Windermere Consulting, and we do leadership development, board development, and strategy development for colleges and universities.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And now let's turn to our next wonderful panelist, Lamar Richards. Lamar, could you provide us with a bit of introduction?
Great. Good morning, everybody. And again, Jen, and to others, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. Yeah, I'm Lamar Richards. I served on the Board of Trustees at UNC Chapel Hill, otherwise known as the Best Blue or the Better Blue in North Carolina, where I was a member of the University Affairs Committee, the Finance Committee, and I also served and helped co-chair several searches, including the search process for our provost, two vice chancellor searches, and a search for a dean of admissions. I was also elated to serve as co-chair of the Campus and Community Advisory Committee alongside the faculty governance chair as well. I am a proud alum of UNC, also an alum of Johns Hopkins University as well. And I currently serve as senior director at the coalition based out of Washington, D.C., which is a public policy think tank and incubator supporting economic development policy.
Great. Well, thank you again, Ben, David, and Lamar, for joining in this conversation this morning. And I'll kick it off with a first question. And I'll leave it open to all three of you if you want to jump in and make a few initial comments on this question to kick us off. What do you think are the elements for effective relations between boards, the university or college administrations, and the campuses they govern?
I'll take a first stab. I'm sure my colleagues can add tremendously to it. But certainly when I think about the effective relations between boards, administrations, and campuses, I think I begin with the simple concept that I call the PACT, P-A-C-T. And I believe that in this board pact between members of the campus, board, and university leadership, there is an underlying assumption that brings all of these various groups together, and that is that is trust. Um, there exists really a bond of trust between leadership and a board and a campus, and really specifically between leadership and a board. That is something that is absolutely inseparable, and something that should never be taken for granted, and it has to be continually cultivated. It requires work, and this trust starts with the chair of a board, and it begins to radiate outward throughout an institution and through leadership and through other segments of the institution between a president and cabinet. Without this anchor of trust, board support can slip, and university leadership can begin to falter. So this core factor begins to enable a series of actions. Boards also, with this bond of trust, can also do a serious amount of blocking and tackling for a university. They can do this in an external environment. They can assist leadership in helping to accomplish goals. And why this is important is that when there's times of undue stress on an institution, this stress can produce introspective reflections of and inspections, if you will, of trust. And this is foundational to really the work of any institution of higher education. And so this, to me, animates what, again, I call a pact, the pact itself. And the reason why I like that term is because there are four elements that I find that are also incredibly important. And they cohere with the first words of the first letter of each of that word pact. I like to think that successful interactions begin with preparation. You must always strive to have a board as prepared as possible for board conversations, armed with data, perspectives that they need to make sure that a campus is informed and that board is informed of campus issues. Second, there is something that I really lean on called anticipation. Cabinets and leaders in a university should try to anticipate as much as possible the questions and concerns that a board might have that need to be addressed. And this goes into a lot of pre-work that goes into board meetings that helps engineer the success of those meetings. The C in the pact is communication. And I think all of us probably would agree that there's never enough communication that can be had between a board, leadership, cabinet, and an institution. Now, this can be hard given all of the consuming demands that many of the jobs of cabinet members and leaders that they have. But you must strive to try to communicate as much as possible. Find that balance between doing the effective work of an institution and also this communication that is essential to the smooth functioning of an institution. And finally, the T in this pact for me is translation. This is tricky because, especially as an academic, I'm certainly an academic, you have to have a certain way of speaking and presenting to a board in ways that are intelligible, that may not be very familiar to a traditional academic. So you must be constantly translating what's happening in the university environment into a language that can be processed and be actionable on a board, and vice versa. One must take what's coming from a board and be able to translate that and transmit that within a larger university community. This is not always easy. So for me, it's the anchor of trust that animates the pact that has those four elements that are key, at least from my point of view. So thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Ben. David, Lamar, anything that you want to add on effective relations with boards and other institutional representatives?
I'll hop in. Not as easy to remember maybe as pact, and maybe not as robust as pact. I think you covered a lot of ground there, Ben. I appreciate that. I was thinking of 3 C's though, however, and that would be consistency, clarity, and communication. And I think when you think about the board, the campus communities, particularly the faculty and the president, everybody's operating kind of in a consistent way, in a way that's predictable. I think that helps minimize opportunities for distrust to form. The clarity around roles and responsibilities and who is going to make what types of decisions, whether we're consulting with someone or we're actually collaborating with someone, just being clear about what you're doing when you're speaking with to a different part of the governance structure. And then the final is communications. Just keep those communication lines open. It's amazing to me how three people can sit around and co-author the same document and come away with 5 different meanings. And so just keep talking about, what is it that we mean, and make sure that the communication lines are flowing.
Thank you, David. Lamar, anything you want to build on PACT or the 3 Cs or?
So I don't have an acronym,
Okay.
but I think both Ben and David did a great job. I think, talking about trust, in my opinion, I think starts at the onboarding process, right? For me, I think establishing that trust for board members and often begins with their introduction to the role. Both David and Ben both mentioned, clarity around responsibilities, the role they should and would occupy. And many times that means getting a good knowledge base and understanding of what's happening at the university level. Universities and colleges are economic engines. And many times we talk about million and billion dollar economic engines. And so, I think as trustees, it is easy to go from being an alum or a donor or a student and thinking I have that perspective, but it is completely different in helping govern a university. And so I think a lot of times in fostering that understanding, it's easier to develop trust. And oftentimes it's easier to trust the leaders of the university, I feel, when you have a good grasp on all that is happening that typically you would otherwise not be privy to, just being a student or just being a faculty member or an alum or a parent. And so I think that's the only thing I probably would add to what David and Ben said is, both PACT and the 3 Cs, I think for me, begin with how we establish knowledge, how we orient board members into their roles.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lamar and David and Ben for really those initial comments to get us started here. Lamar, I'm going to move to you next to ask a question that I think you'll bring a particular perspective to. So in your experience, how would you define the role of a student trustee on a university board? What strategies have you found to be effective in ensuring that the student perspective in meetings, in the work as a trustee, that those perspectives are taken seriously and with weight when serving as a student trustee?
And I appreciate the question. Being a student trustee is very unique. And it certainly was no different at Chapel Hill because you are a full voting member of the board. You often sit on various committees and you have a voice at the table. And then you also have a unique perspective on the ongoings on campus and what it's like to sit in the classroom and that student experience, probably and likely more recently than any of the other trustees are on the board. I think part of a successful relationship that a board can have with a student trustee is often around trust, but also the perspective that a current student can bring and help elevate and educate the conversation around the current happenings on campus. When I was a student trustee, I felt that oftentimes students did not understand the decisions being made on the board. And the board did not quite understand the diverse perspectives emerging among student populations and student communities on campus. A successful student trustee in many ways will be one of your loudest and most persistent advocates. And I was no short of that during my time as a trustee. But I think also I developed some very strong relationships with colleagues on the board largely based around just fact finding. Oh, Lamar, tell me more about this course or tell me more about the registration process for classes. I'm seeing these things. And honestly, I think a student trustee is, in my opinion, very helpful to the administration of the college because they can do a lot in dispelling misinformation, which tends to spread very easily with social media and the digital age that we're living in. Oh, you might see something on campus about housing conditions or something related to the registration process. And, a student trustee can quickly provide insight into that without the trustees having to go around to kind of find that information. And so I feel that like that insight being provided by a student trustee is invaluable. And I also feel that the student trustee, in my opinion and in my experience, is able to also take those learnings, those shared learnings back to the student body. And you, in a successful student trustee board relationship, you often have less confusion and chaos on campus because the roles are working in both ways. And in my experience, a lot of times decisions were being made that students didn't understand. And because I was at the table and I was a part of those conversations, I was able to bring back valuable information to peers and student groups and student leaders alike.
That's great, Lamar. Thank you so much. And again, that trust and translation that David and Ben were speaking to appeared in your response. And I'll also add here at the New School, we have student trustees. I know not all institutions have those roles on their boards, but similar to what you were noting, Lamar, we find that student perspective so valuable and it adds so much to creating a really well-rounded conversation in board meetings. And again, our student trustees, like you, Lamar, are some of our most outstanding students. They're dedicated, they engage in the conversations. And to your point, they really do try to work in having that kind of communication in both directions. So there's an opportunity for people to better understand the student perspective and also to better understand the responsibilities and some of the functions of the Board of Trustees. So thanks again, Lamar. David, I'm going to turn to you for this next question. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how the role of university boards, how you think that role has evolved over the years, particularly in response to financial pressures and over the years, shifting and changing political scrutiny, as well as here today.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate the through line, I think, and the way that we recruited trustees over the course of my career, at least, is, always have ambassadors, advocates, and advisors on the board to help you through. But, as a VP for advancement, I was always fond of making sure that we had really strong donors on the board as well. And often kind of collapsed those two categories sometimes of trustee and donor, which is now I can, with more perspective, say that's not a healthy approach either. That you need more than just donors on the board, and not every donor really is meant to be on a board of trustees. And so I think that we've also often seen trusteeship as aligned with philanthropy, and there are really important roles that trustees play in philanthropy, but those aren't necessarily the same thing. We also, I think in 2000, but it's particularly in 2008 and 2009, all of a sudden, folks that were recruited to the board to vote yes for all of the great ideas that the president brought to the board, all of a sudden were confronted with the fact that the business model for higher education, which had worked so well since World War II, was really broken. And so we saw maybe schools facing deficit spending year after year. And, that advocacy and that voting yes began to kind of come home to roost a little bit. And boards started to recognize that they had a fiduciary responsibility for the institution. That was more than just being supportive and more than just being a cheerleader for the institution, that they really had to care for the assets of the institution. And ultimately, I think they've begun to understand that they have to be stewards of the mission of the institution as well to help see it through different times. And so I think that clarity is starting to really come home for boards now, and they're trying to find ways to calibrate that responsibility with respect for the other governing entities within the institution. So how do you have responsibility and authority and delegate that authority and responsibility appropriately so that you can ensure the vitality and the thriving of the mission and the business model for your particular institution. Recently, the political environment has created even more complexities for boards. And on one hand, I think as we're seeing playing out, this is also a financial concern that we need to think about the fact that so much of our business model was dependent upon federal and state aid and federal and state support, that another revenue stream is under threat right now. And so we've got to figure out what is our value proposition and how do we create a sustainable business model that takes into account not only a demographic cliff, but also the shifting sands in the federal and state support landscape as well. And so I think the boards are kind of beginning to understand that they have a responsibility for the institution itself, but also for the mission of the institution. And that responsibility can be more complex than just supporting the best ideas that come to the table.
Thank you, David. And I'll add, that complexity for boards that you've noted. I think that again reflects back on some of what Ben helped us with starting off on, really trying to make sure that you position trustees and your board to be informed. And that's about preparation, anticipation, even in times of uncertainty. There's that need for working with the board and helping them and partnering with them through these kind of complex conversations and topics. So it's complex, but we really have to work together in the best interest of the institution. So thank you again. So Ben, I'm going to turn to you next for the next question. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on how universities can balance board oversight with institutional autonomy and shared governance. From your perspective, what are some best practices for leaders navigating these types of relationships with trustees?
Well, you really go for the jugular there. Well, listen, this is a tricky topic, and I think in my mind, when I think about it, the single most important thing that can be done to really create that right balance between board oversight, institutional autonomy, shared governance, the key thing here is a very clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the various constituencies. So we have several key constituency groups in a university environment. There's the board, the administration, faculty, and students. All of them have a lane. And so let me take just one step back and look at the responsibilities of the board. And there was an article that came out today in the Boston Globe, and I think one of the quotes to take from that is that Harvard thinks in centuries. There was a noted University of Chicago president who started his board meetings all the time by saying, we're trying to create, the university that is 50 years from now, the successful university. There's another quote out there, I don't know who said this, but the primary goal of a board is making sure the university of the future is not harmed or suffocated by the university of today. So what this does, when you take that perspective and that lane, it puts into play a set of functions that require key oversight from the board perspective. And that is the hiring of the president, the approval of key cabinet members, approval of a budget, managing those large, or not managing, but approving those large contracts, $5 million more, investment income, capital and physical plan improvements, endowment management, fundraising support, and a variety of high-level strategic strategies. That's the lane, right? And that's the clear role here. Now, when times get tough, and that's one of the reasons why we're probably having this convening now, it is not uncommon for a board to lean in on some of these matters that register more risk. And so as they lean in, they're in an area, let's say, of approving the budget, and they may go in a couple of layers. And so the question then is, yes, your lane, but where does that lane, where does the management begin, and where does the board responsibility end? And that's always a question, and that has to be managed. But it begins with the understanding of the lane and the altitude. So when you're starting now to talk about shared governance, which I think is, it unfolds in a variety of ways on many campuses, and especially now, we're really talking about, Jen, the academic enterprise. That's the teaching mission, the learning mission, the research execution, faculty policies. These are the areas that are primarily the purview of the faculty, and they are executing the core mission, the curriculum, the instructional decisions, the research decisions. And so the vehicles then that are available for the faculty and in a shared governance environment are the faculty senate, task forces, committee assignments, and then student government also has a role to play here. These are the instruments, and at least for the faculty code becomes a key instrument and document that really defines some of that purview. So again, that's another lane, and so everyone knowing these lanes is critical, because there's always the idea that one has to slip out of it. Now, the administration has a lane too, and that is partnership with the board and faculty and student bodies. And it's administering the day-to-day operations and the policy implementation, the inflow of students to some extent, managing the resources that one allocates to instruction, to research, to housing students, to hiring faculty. That's a critical lane here. And so once these various groups understand these lanes, there has to be mutual respect and a good mutual understanding of those lanes. And to achieve better relations and results, I'm going to lean back in on what David said, what Lamar has said, and it's one of those C's that David has talked about. It's communication and creating regular, structured communication and channels between the various groups. And let me add transparency. As much as possible, transparency in decision making. It builds that trust. Now, there are certain areas you just cannot talk about, right? There's certain aspects that you just cannot divulge for a variety of purposes, some of which are very much legal. But these, as much as you can in terms of letting people know how decisions are made, that helps. And then thinking about committees strategically and their work strategically becomes something that is very, very key. And when possible, and I can't say, I've been in a variety of board environments. I've never seen it done consistently in one place or the other, but there are instances where a joint committee, where you have members of the administration and members of the board and faculty kind of opining together and working on key issues, can sometimes be an effective tool. And lastly, I'm going to leave it with this, is accountability, and making sure that board members are regularly informed on higher education practices, and that they also do a regular review of themselves and their effectiveness. I've had the chance to do this in some of the organizations that I've been a part of, and it's a healthy practice. But making sure as well that faculty senates do an assessment of their work. These assessments are sometimes construed as suspiciously at times, but they are healthy because they get a lot of laundry out, inspected and talked about, and some of the elephants in the room shrink dramatically and become very manageable. So let's not shy away from those things as we do our work in our lanes, because the accountability helps with transparency, which then helps with the respect that is given across these various areas that build a more cohesive organization. I don't know any place that's got it all right. Just be honest with you. This is very theoretical and piecing together from various institutions that I've been at. But if I were to dream of a perfect scenario, that those would be some of the elements of that.
Thank you, Ben. And I agree. I'm not sure we're getting it all right all the time, but it's something we're striving for, right? I think many of us are striving for. So I'm gonna pull off my moderator hat and put my panelist hat on and answer the next question. Actually, some of what Ben noted is it gives me an opportunity to build a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the university secretary, which I have been serving at as here at the New School for the last 4 years. And the role the university secretary plays in aiding university leaders and boards in collaborations during a variety of times at an institution, ups, downs, steady state. And I do think the role of the university secretary is really important in creating these connections between university leaders and administration and the Board of Trustees, in many instances with sometimes the different governance groups or formations at the institution. And, you know, some of what my fellow panelists have noted is really where the university secretary tries to do some work in making those connections. A lot of the work can relate to building those collaborative trust relationships. As Lamar noted, a lot of times that starts at the very beginning when it's the conversation of recruiting and onboarding trustees to help them understand what their work will look like, to help them understand how valuable their perspectives and contributions to conversations will be. And so that's a really important role for the university secretary. I'd also note a lot of the work for the secretary or the point person for the board is the work that goes on within the committees. I think oftentimes we're thinking of a board of trustees as a group, sometimes thinking of it as a monolith, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit, not a monolith, but a group that's coming together and always sitting at the table to work through every matter, when really a lot of that work is done within board committees, and so much important work, conversation, engagement to advance the institution is really housed and anchored in board committees. And so having really high functioning board committees is important in times of great opportunity and in times of great challenge, because they are really doing so much of that work that feeds the Board of Trustees as far as any kind of conversations or decisions that need to be made at the board level. And then another point that one of my fellow panelists noted was healthy practices. That is something that is so important for the role of the university secretary, encouraging that reflection. Are our functions solid? Are we using some good practices? Again, striving, Ben, striving. Are we striving for good practices? Maybe we can achieve some best practices every now and then as well in our work on the board. And really that kind of healthy practice requires some regular processes and reflection. Board assessments. Do we have the right board committees? Are the board committee charters up to date? Do they really match the scope and responsibilities for the board committees for what the work of the board needs to be now, and how that board committee is functioning now as we look 30 to 50 years down the line, so that work of this committee and the work of the board that we're doing now is really going to function well, and how that impacts the institution in years to come. So I think from the sense of the perspective of the university secretary, it's doing some of that behind the scenes. It's doing that sometimes in the front and center. It's sometimes having to say some things in certain spaces that are more challenging to hear. You know, people don't always want to hear me talk about precedent, but that's an important thing that we need to think about in the work of the Board of Trustees. So that's a little bit about how I think about the role of the university secretary. So, I'll pause there and maybe we can jump into one more question that I'll open up to the panelists before we think about a little bit of Q&A from our attendees here. So for my panelists, let me think of your last question. I think let me jump into, or actually maybe I can leave us with something that really also speaks to a little bit of what the Academic Leadership Institute is driving for and striving for. I think we've all been involved in work that tries to really bring broad representation to the membership of our boards of trustees. A lot of times that also allows for different perspectives in the conversation. It allows for different topics to be raised up in different ways for the attention of the board. So I'd love to hear any panelists' thoughts on ways in which you have seen some good practices or strategies to diversify board membership. And once you have maybe built a more diverse board, how do you continue to bring the board along individually as trustees and the board as a whole in being informed and guiding on the variety of needs and concerns from various groups, including underrepresented groups that are on our campuses? So I'll open it up to you all.
I'd be happy
David,
to
you
jump
wanna
in
start?
there.
Please.
One of my roles, particularly as in the VP for advancement position and supporting the board and as we're selecting new members, just a simple thing was just to put a matrix together. And so you'd have down one side all the names of the board members and prospective board members, and across the top you'd have kind of all the vectors of diversity that you were looking for. Traditionally, this has included like professional diversity. We need an accountant, we need a lawyer, regional diversity, we need alumni, non-alumni. If you're a church-related institution, we need members of the church and people who aren't members of the church. And so you would, and then racial and ethnic diversity and gender diversity, all these vectors were there. The thing that I think there's a couple of things that I would lift up for your reflection. One is that boards are typically a lagging indicator of the diversity of the institution. Boards are typically a lagging indicator for the diversity of the institution. And if you buy into the premise, which I do, that the potential of the institution is capped by the capacity of the board, the potential of the institution is capped by the capacity of the board, then you really have to make the diversity of the board a leading indicator. So you have to begin to imagine what the university of the future looks like, and how are you going to populate your board so that you can bring the perspectives into the room that will help you pull the institution forward, as opposed to steward what the institution has been. And so that means that the board is not the conservative, stodgy boardroom that we think of. It really has to be kind of the progressive leading edge of what's happening at the institution, and really what's happening in higher education. The second thing I wanted to point out to you, I've become really fond of a book by Dick Chait and Barbara Taylor and others called Leadership as Governance. And there are three different modes of governance that they talk about. I'm sorry, governance is leadership. Three different modes of governance they talk about: fiduciary, strategic, and generative. And typically they talk about that with how the boards are operating. And I can imagine in any given year, and sometimes in any given meeting, that boards really need to operate at the fiduciary mode. There are times when they need to operate at the strategic mode and times when they really need to be generative. And so one of the things I would encourage you to think about as you're thinking about new board members is populating the board with cognitive agility, with the ability to move among those three different. So, you don't just look at the audit and go home, but you look at the audit, go home. How does that inform your strategy? How does that open up new questions that you can frame for the institution? And so I think bringing people on that are really good at the fiduciary part, really good at the strategic part, really good at the generative part, and really good at communicating, to use the Ben's comment of translation among those three, so that you're not stuck in any one of those modes at any one time, I think is really important vector of diversity to consider.
Jen, I'm going to jump in, and David inspired me to think about a couple of things. And I'll start just by commenting to the group that I have a son who just started fishing this weekend. And I've learned a lot, surprisingly for this conversation, from that process. And as I said, you're not going to catch any fish. And he said, Dad, it depends on where I'm fishing and how I'm going to deal with my bait. That's exactly the same thing with boards. And so where are you looking? And how are you going to get there? Search firms, for instance. I know that we here at Howard also we use a search firm to help us go fishing, and it works well in terms of really articulating the needs and matching that with a diverse group of individuals, and using. And this is what prompted me to dive in, David, is that leading indicator philosophy. And so I think that's something that we're trying. And as you do that, though, it's always being cognizant that you're looking fundamentally for expertise, and you're looking for the best people you can find, and you're rejecting the notion that those people don't exist in certain communities. And that's critical, because then you got the right mindset and trajectory, and the person you're going to bring on is going to be a full-fledged, valuable member, in fact invaluable member to the contributions of the board. So it's where you fish and how you do it, what bait you use, and sometimes bringing in somebody else who can help you to do those things, I think are fundamental. So thanks, David, for prompting me to think about my son's fishing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, David. Lamar, was there anything that you wanted to add or build upon?
Again, I think both of what David and Ben shared, is wrapped up in something that I've been saying since my time on the board at UNC back in 2021, which is, diversity is the bedrock of higher education. And part of this, what both, Jen, what you shared, David, and what Ben also shared, this idea that we as board members can assess among ourselves and do a needs assessment to see what are we missing. That the effectiveness of that process must always start and begin with the reality of us all believing that diversity enriches the college experience, it enriches academia, it enriches higher education. And I say that because if you have trustees who do not necessarily buy into the idea that diversity is beneficial, then that needs assessment might look different from trustee to trustee. And what comes out of it might be skewed in a certain direction. And I think all of us here have seen examples of that, whether it be, we might need people with academic experience, or people who might, as David shared, might have been donors in the past. And in the same way, I think, we did that process at Chapel Hill. And one of the things that, I think we seldom think about is geographic diversity. Many of our students want to study abroad and they want to maybe go from North Carolina to the West Coast. Do we have people on our board with that experience in Silicon Valley, et cetera, who might be able to enrich those connections? I do not think the needs assessment process works properly if the board has not come to a mutual understanding of where diversity fits within the framework of their governance structure. And oftentimes that might look different than the diversity framework of the university as a strategic mission. but more so as a governance mission, where does diversity fit? And how do we embrace it as a board? And it doesn't have to be some bold diversity statement, but more so in practice, in terms of recruitment. As Ben shared, are we using the same firm for 20 years, or are we going to diversify the firms we're using? Are we using a firm at all? What is the process and pathways to becoming a board member that we're recruiting through? And are those pathways sufficient for meeting whatever diversity framework we've agreed upon here? But I do want to underscore what was previously stated around the needs, the needs assessment, which I think is really critical for determining, and also to add to that, how often are you doing that needs assessment, right? Is it incidental? Is it reactionary? Or is it a part of your normal process by which you undertake to determine and make sure that the board stays evolving with both the university and also the national higher education landscape?
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. I really appreciate some of the wonderful points that you've made here this morning, and also a little bit of back and forth that we've been able to have across us as a panel. So what we're going to do now is I'd love to open the floor for a few more questions. We can try to blend in some audience questions. For those of you that are attending, you can enter your questions via the Q&A function, and I'll be able to see those and present them to our panelists. Again, thank you for thank you to our panel for sharing their expertise and invaluable insights. Ben, can I turn it to you, because I think the president has to be on the move here in a second. Is there any final things that you want to say while you're here, Ben?
Well, first of all, this is just a rich and timely discussion. I'm honored to be here with tremendous colleagues. I want to thank the audience for coming out this morning. I just will add just two fast things on the conversation we just had. Let's not forget as well that there are organizations out there that are designed specifically to look for underrepresented minorities on boards, black women on boards, for instance, other types of organizations that exist out there. And then also make sure we leverage our networks and your alumni as sources. So let's never forget those to really make sure our boards really are aiming to kind of round themselves out. So thank you, and I apologize for having to leave.
No apologies needed, Ben. It was wonderful to have you this morning. We so appreciate you. Look forward to seeing you soon, and good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Again, for our attendees, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function. I'll take a look at those and then I'll throw them out, and David Lamar and I will share our thoughts and perspectives with you. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about, I like this one as being a former university secretary. Let's talk a little bit about term limits. Should there be term limits for trustees and clear paths towards leadership roles on boards? And any thoughts on how boards shift and change over time as the institution ages, they age? Love to hear some thoughts that you have, David Lamar, and I'm happy to add in as well.
I'll hop in there. So I think board members should have term limits. I think that it should be written into the bylaws. And you're always trying to balance the continuity, the experience, the wisdom with fresh perspectives, and really there's a number of folks out there who'd be really great to serve on the board, and it's not just the 15 to 25 or 35 that you might have in the room at the time. And so you really want to make sure that you make room for folks to come in. But boards are also notoriously bad for letting people go when they don't show up, or they don't support, or they just aren't very active. And so I think writing in term limits also gives you a way to have a gracious exit. I've had one thing that I've done is written into the bylaws that you can have 2 successive terms. They can be 3-year or 4-year terms. But in order to be eligible for that second term, you have to meet certain criteria. It could be attendance criteria, it could be giving criteria, VP for advancement, confessing here. It could be that you'd have those kinds of participatory requirements there, and then you wouldn't be eligible for the second term unless you met those. But those have to be objectively determined. It can't be the governance committee saying, "Oh gosh, don't think Fred's doing enough," but it's just gotta be objective, because nobody's gonna want to say that you're not eligible for a second term. And then the same thing's true at the end of that second term, that you have at least a year hiatus where you can go off the board, be thanked for your service, and then it gives the board the prerogative to bring you back on at a later date if that's something, if that is the continuity that you want to preserve. You also asked about leadership roles and how you might be able to help with leadership roles. I do think there's an important thing to think about succession planning within the board, and often you have chairs and vice chairs. I like to think of the vice chair as a chair elect, and so the big vote every year is not necessarily for the chair, but for the chair elect, because that person might lead you going forward, and that person can have an opportunity to sit with the officers, sit with the executive committee, watch how the meetings are run, and begin to develop their understanding of how they might want to shape the board when they ascend to that chair role. The same thing can be true for committees. You can have chairs and chair elects, and just don't have people in there for 15, 20 years, although it's not uncommon to see people who've been in those leadership roles for a long time, but you really aren't making a way for promoting and developing leaders within the board if you don't have some kind of clear pathways. And just make the commitment to their leadership earlier. Don't keep holding out. Well, we'll just wait and see how she does or how he does. You just go ahead and say you're in line.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I'll just add again, and affirm and advocate for healthy practices. Much of what you've noted is these kind of healthy practices to being in place with the board all along the way, and it allows for these types of transitions, new leadership, succession planning, and thinking ahead before you get to a particular moment. Lamar, I'll turn to you. Anything you want to add on healthy practices and term limits?
I think I agree. I think I probably will not be alone in saying that I agree with the concept of term limits. I think it is certainly a healthy practice. And I think it also lends, back to what I was sharing with the previous question, which is, what is our process for determining what our needs are, and as they evolve, how do we evolve that process as well? And I think if you have a healthy process, right, very similar to what we see in the research enterprise around impact assessment, KPIs, performance indicators, like David was mentioning, attendance, etc. If you have a healthy process by which you take to determine what your needs are, you might find that, okay, we need someone maybe who is a donor, who knows what it's like to give, or maybe we need someone who is a student a bit more recently. And you might find that your board is not getting larger anytime soon. And so in that assessment, what does it look like then to bring in fresh and new perspective, and to objectively, and I really appreciate David for using that word, because being objective is so important, especially in the assessment process, because you might often find that when we're doing assessments, some members might be doing it from the perspective of, I'm comparing myself to the person sitting beside me, and not objectively as in how are we performing as a board. And then also, I think, this goes also not just to, what are we doing to assess, but also those pathways that Ben mentioned before you depart around where are we looking at to fill these roles? How are we filling them? What are the pipelines where we're meeting with certain alumni groups, our investment advisory council, our endowment management groups? Where are we how are we sourcing our board members to help and figure out what those missing links are? And then also, I would be remiss if I didn't say, and also asking students. Students have ideas, and in many cases, their parents are alum who are well connected in other networks, other places. But also take a look at, what are your fastest growing industries? What are the fastest growing industries, the fastest growing majors on your campus? How can you connect better with students? If you are seeing a 10% increase year to year in business majors and engineering majors, maybe it might make sense to have someone of those industries represented on your board. Maybe it might make sense to have someone with experience connecting with historically marginalized communities, etc. But you will not know what you're missing until you do an objective assessment and regularly of what those missing links are. And so I think I want to underscore what both of you shared around just making sure you have a healthy practice with everything you're doing as a board member, but certainly with how you're looking at bringing on colleagues or maybe stepping off, right? I think if you're objectively doing an assessment, you might determine there needs to be someone younger or someone of a more recent graduation class. That might mean that I, as maybe one of the older members, may need to take a step back. And that's okay if you truly have a healthy relationship with how you care for the university.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me pose the next question for us. We talked quite a bit about trust and building relationships within the Board of Trustees and with the Board of Trustees. So this question is, what are some tactics you use to cultivate trust and good relationships with trustees in the times between regular meetings? Not just maybe in the room, but some of that work that goes on between meetings, between formal meetings of the board or board committees.
I'll take a stab at this one first.
Sure.
Because I have a very unique perspective on this. Having been a student trustee at Chapel Hill, one of the things I think that we often, or misconceived notion, I should say, about trustees is that they don't want to also have fun and be immersed in campus life. And one of the things that I went out of my way to do is to invite colleagues on the board to student events, to happenings and gatherings on campus. We're going on a quick trip, and David might appreciate this. If I'm going on a quick trip with our VP of Advancement to try to raise money in New York or whatever, do you want to join? Can we bring colleagues along, etc.? I really think it's important for the two-way street of trust to also involve students and not just having the board look like this backroom group of conservative thinkers up on the hill that we hear about in press briefings or through the news or through press releases or emails, but instead actually have them be members of the community. And it doesn't have to be some overwhelming thing, right, where we make it a hard and fast rule where you have to attend a certain number of events or etc. But more so, if you are an alum on the board and you went to one of our engineering programs and graduated, maybe you might be interested in connecting in a mentorship capacity with current engineering students, etc. And I will tell you that in doing that, it helped break down a lot of those historical barriers to trust for students who would normally never engage with the board if they did not come into campus. You do not, as I'm sure you both know, most of your seats aren't being filled by students at your board meetings. And so oftentimes, yet your students are typically your strongest and most vocal advocates for the university. And so it often takes a balance of trying to get your board members and your colleagues immersed in campus life and culture. And what I can say is it is easier for me to convince my colleagues on the board to come onto campus and in campus life than it is for me to convince students to come and sit through a board meeting. And oftentimes you have to, play that thin line of, okay, yeah, here's some events happening, here's some upcoming events on campus, here's some ways to get involved. And a healthy balance in that, not oversaturation, over involvement, but just being aware through informal channels of what's going on campus and ways you can connect and be a resource to the administration in ways outside of your official capacity as a board member. And I think that works. I think it works for trust, establishing trust, maintaining trust. And I think something that Ben shared before he left and David said earlier, it's also just transparency, right? How do we engage with transparency? How do we then say, there are certain things we can't share for legal reasons, etc. But how do we still underscore that we should be a body that folks can trust in, even though we can't share the explicit and specific details of a decision? I think oftentimes we boards make a mistake, in my opinion, of thinking that because we can't talk about specific details, that means a cone of silence around an issue. But instead, it might mean, how do we embrace this issue and talk about it, what we can talk about? And then let the community know we can't talk about this for legal reasons. However, you can remain, assured that we're going to do what we think is best as a board to make sure the university stays moving in the right direction, et cetera. So I think, it all kind of goes back to the communication, et cetera. But, trust is really important. And I often see that boards with a healthy balance of how they communicate and how they underscore transparency often succeed more.
Thank you, Lamar. David, anything you want to add?
Sure.
Please?
I just would say, I mean, number one rule, no surprises. So, make sure that if if your board members are surprised at the board meeting, you're surprised too. So try to brief them in advance of things that that they're going to care about. And that might be, trustee by trustee. Make sure that they're aware. Now, my experience is in independent institutions, state institutions have to worry about what constitutes a public meeting and things like that. So that's more complicated. But at least be sure that your trustees aren't surprised by administrative decisions or personnel decisions or things like that, and keep them informed. I used to think that you'd have to create a report with bullet points and pictures and graphs and send it off to communications and marketing before you send it to the board to communicate with them. I found that one of the things that my trustees appreciated more than anything was every Thursday, I just dedicated about 15 minutes to do what I call 3 quick things. And so I take about 15 minutes before lunch on Thursday. I pounded out 3 one-sentence bullet points that just told them what was going on campus. And it could have been that there was a concert last night and it was well attended. Could be that, Professor Smith announced retirement at the end of this year, but just make sure that they had a little touch point about what things are going on. We forget these are volunteers that are engaging once every few months with what's going on in the school, and you could actually keep them informed from time to time. And the final thing that I'll say is, when you provide pre-meeting materials, have a decision support perspective. You don't have to flood them with all of the information that you would love for them to know, but think about what are the outcomes of the meeting or the agenda that you're trying to have, and make sure that they have the information exactly, precisely, not too much, not too little, the information they need to make the decisions, and not be wondering, what should I really read?
Thank you both. I'm going to jump to the next question. Maybe this one, David, you want to start with a response on, and I can add to as well. It goes back to something I was saying around, of course, the Board of Trustees and its functions, but a board is not a monolith. And so we do need to think about how individual board members are informed, but also being thoughtful about sometimes actions that are taken as the board may differ from actions taken by individual trustees. So your thoughts on handling or managing or trying to guide individual board members that might feel that some direct actions, direct outreach to community members is part of their way of helping the institution or helping the board. But sometimes that's not how that lands. That outreach doesn't always land in that way. And so any thoughts you have on navigating that, guidance that you might give to president, the board chair, when those kind of individual actions by a trustee perhaps have particular intentions, but don't always land in that way.
Yeah, so I think, Lamar talked earlier about onboarding and education and making sure that everybody was aware of kind of what's expected of being a trustee. One of the phrases that I've drawn from AGB's Principles of Trusteeship that just stuck with me is that board members should think independently and act collectively. And so you want to bring independent thought into the room, but remember that the board doesn't have, a trustee doesn't have authority outside of the boardroom, and outside of the decision of the board. The inverse of that is scary. You also don't want the board to think collectively and trustees to act independently. So you don't want everybody to come in and just kind of agree with each other and not have, challenging, independent, critical thought, and just kind of have this group think, collective thinking. But you also don't want trustees out acting independently. And so they have to remember that as trustees, they have a responsibility to the corporate body of the board, and that corporate body is what's making a decision and is vested with the authority. Individual trustees aren't. The other thing that's important is for the governance committee or the membership committee or the board chair to, if somebody does begin acting independently in a way, particularly that's not a good reflection on the board of the institution, is to remind that person that you don't have authority outside of the boardroom, that you bring your thoughts and your best efforts into the boardroom, and we'll work together to do this. You don't try to meet that out in the press. You don't try to meet that out publicly with the political entities, with alumni, with donors, with students. You bring it to the boardroom and make sure that it's really worked out there. And then you can also have people with good intentions kind of getting into a challenge. And this is because we don't really realize that folks look at us differently. Once we're on the board, we're trustees. We're no longer the person that sits next to me every baseball game. We are now trustees. And so when you're at the baseball game and they're talking about the win-loss record, they're talking about how great they're doing against the rival, participate in the conversation. When the conversation turns to the salary of the coach, get up and go buy hot dogs for everybody, and then come back when that conversation is over. But when you start kind of finding that the conversations are drifting into the policy realm, you really want to make sure that you understand that you've got a different, to use Jennifer's term, a different hat on now, and you can't take it off. People know you're a trustee, and you have to remember that all the time, even if you just feel like a gung-ho volunteer.
Thank you, David. And I completely agree. And again, some of what you noted is so much of this work with trustees, both at the beginning and continually, to educate them about the work of the board, the function of the board, what their role is in that kind of collective governance process. So that's a great response. Lamar, I'll just look to you. Was there anything that you wanted to add, or you want me to
No,
ask maybe one
I
more question?
completely agree with what David said. I want to add one caveat to my previous response, which is in every instance, something I want to underscore what I said previously is I invited my colleagues to come to an event or come to something. And that was critical. And I also underscore as a student trustee, I'd prefer for you to talk with me about student events or student gatherings, etc. Because oftentimes the student trustee serves in that in-between space. And so to David's point, and to Jen's point, your point around, going to events, informally, and your presence there as both a trustee and as probably a supporter, etc. It was different for me when I invited trustees to an event or something like that. It wasn't just them showing up, which can sometimes be intimidating for students or surprising, or just not even the administration might be not even be knowledgeable that a trustee is on campus, etc. And so whenever I would go out of my way to invite colleagues, it would be in a very strategic way so that they would feel one value, but also so that I could make sure as a student trustee, there was an environment where students would feel, supported as well.
Great. Thank you both. Next question is, how do we and how should we all continue to educate board members? And I think that education is could be taken from a few different angles in your response to the question of how do we and how should we continue to educate board members. I think especially in these times when we have so many members of our college and university communities that are feeling uncertain, concerned, now and perhaps in the past as well, feeling unheard. How do we help bring boards along to understand that and educate them? Because I do think that really has an impact on their work, having that um, knowledge and being informed. So David and Lamar, and any comments that you have on that?
Can you expand a little bit more on the unheard piece?
Sure. I think, we're definitely seeing this on our campus, and I'm hearing from colleagues on other campuses, just feelings of real uncertainty, and expressions of that uncertainty. And I think many members of our community want to make sure that they are heard, that their concerns are heard. And so there's ways in which that should be informed, or our board should be informed around that. And then we bring them along and continue to educate them on that experience. But how do we do that? And how should we go about approaching that? Recognizing that it does inform oftentimes the conversations that goes on within the board and the work of the board.
Lamar, do you want to take the first shot at that?
Sure. I had a similar conversation yesterday, so I'll just share, what I'm encouraging folks in this moment is, in this moment, don't blink, right? And what I mean by that is, if you have a normal process by which you do not go and talk to the media after a meeting, but you instead, as a group, release a statement, etc., stick by your process and stick by the expertise of your leaders. If you have a VP of Government Affairs whose job is to go to DC, go on Capitol Hill, get an understanding of potential legislation or executive action, bring that back, distill that for you as a group, stick by your process. I think in this moment where there's so much uncertainty, to Jen's point around we might wake up tomorrow with new action or new attacks or etc., continue to underscore the value of not just your institution, but in this moment, the role that higher education plays in our society as well. And so, when I was having this conversation, just this week, I'm like, don't blink. You have a process. You've been through this process. If institutions of higher education can't be resilience hubs, can't be places where we foster resilience to these moments, then we're failing as a construct, right? I think in this moment, you need to continue leading and shepherding the university through this tough time. And I would add that if you as a board member are feeling uncertain, then you can only imagine how your faculty, your staff, your students, your administration are feeling. Because while you might be a volunteer, their livelihoods, their salaries, their checks, their access to scholarships, their jobs all depend on what happens next. And so oftentimes we're looking to boards more, right? We're looking to our colleagues more in these moments for leadership and advice. And so what I would say is don't blink, stick by your process. You can't talk about certain legal things. You know that you act as a board, to David's point, collectively. Stick by that. Stick by your chancellor, stick by your president, and stick by those channels that are well established to do and perform as they should. And then when these adverse moments come up, you then take a step back and say, okay, what can we do collectively? But certainly don't take this moment to mean I, as an individual board member, should be acting individually, or I should be giving my sentiments or personal thoughts individually, because that often just adds to the chaos. I mean, if you want opinion, you go to New York Times, Washington Post, any big publication, you can find many op-eds, many opinion pieces. In this moment of leadership, the true test is how many boards are going to stick by their process and make sure to underscore the value that their process brings to the governance of the university.
I think that's spot on. I love that. Don't blink. And I think that you should have a regular regime of educating the board on general governance principles, kind of doing case studies or reading articles together and talking about how your board is going to act in context, so that you do have that muscle memory when you get into these difficult situations like this. I think that in these times when there are people who do feel unheard and wonder if the board actually knows what's quote unquote really going on, I think there's an extra burden on the president, the VP for student development, the chaplains, the compliance officers, the mental health counselors, the provosts, the deans, to make sure that they're channeling up the information that they're getting from student government, making sure that information is getting up to the president, and the president has an important role to make sure that that's communicated also to the board. But agree 100% with Lamar. It's not a time for 35 independent surveys of what's really going on out there, and just make sure that you are asking, as collectively asking the president to keep you informed and make sure that you feel informed, but don't take that into your own hands to go out there and be the listening ear that everybody would love, but would probably create the chaos that Lamar was predicting.
Wonderful. We're just mopping up against our end time of 11:30. So before I thank everyone and begin to adjourn us, I just want to say thank you, David. Thank you, Lamar. Many thanks, of course, to Ben Vincent, who joined us as well. David, Lamar, any final thoughts that you want to share with the attendees today before I wrap us up here?
Well, I just say, just remember that it's really difficult time to be a trustee right now, and some of these big headline decisions that we're looking at, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback those, but boards are wrestling with very, very difficult decisions right now, and every institution should be practicing that muscle memory that Lamar was talking about, making sure that you've got use Jennifer's term, your healthy practices within reach, and make sure that you're ready to respond when the spotlight comes to you, or maybe you might want to join in the spotlight too.
Thank you, David. Lamar, any final points you want to share with our attendees?
No, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think if anything, this moment that higher education is grappling with underscores the necessity of more conversations like this, the work that ALI does. If one board is worried about something that's happening right now, the likelihood is most institutions are. If there's a single board right now that isn't, their eyes, their ears aren't pointed to the sky thinking what's happening, then they don't really care about higher education. So the money is betted on. Most people are thinking right now, how do we proceed? How do we advance? What do we do? And a lot of the answers to this lie in how you partner with other universities, how you learn from the experience of other universities and lean into that shared practice, but also leaning into conversations and moments and gatherings like this, where you can ideate and listen to us ramble and talk about our experiences, but also ask your questions and feel supported to know that there are people who have sat in those seats before and who have some guidance and advice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, again, David, Lamar, thank you so much for such a great conversation this morning. Again, thank you to our colleague, President Ben Vincent, who joined us a little earlier. And that's all the time we have for today. To Lamar's point, we could continue to go on and on and on. But again, thank you to our panelists. It's been my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed being the moderator for the conversation today. Many thank yous to Drs. Dwight McBride and Earl Lewis, Dahlia and Elizabeth from the Academic Leadership Institute staff. Just so wonderful to work with all of you, and thank you for organizing this conversation again today. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, good afternoon, and please do continue to engage in these types of webinars and conversations. I have learned so much today from our panelists and from the questions that came in from our attendees. So my great appreciation to all of you, and my best wishes to everyone. Thank you.